Welcome to Change the Conversation with the Hopefulist. My name is Wendy McClure, and it's time we had a conversation about living in a patriarchy and how that affects our lives. Together, we can make a difference and change the conversation. Hello, and welcome to a special edition of Change the Conversation with the Hopefulist. I have a guest with me today. It is Michelle Walter from Life from the Summit. Hello, Michelle, and welcome.
Hi, Wendy. I'm so honored that you asked me to do this with you.
Well, I'm so excited to talk to you because I happened to come across a video that you were doing on Instagram, and it was talking about the difference between being childless and child-free. So I didn't think there was a difference.
Yeah, I didn't either until maybe 6 months ago or so. And I think it's a distinction that can be really empowering and enlightening for people to understand. So, my understanding of this, and this understanding comes from a woman named Jodie Day, who has done a lot of work. She's over in the UK or is from there originally. I'm not sure where she lives now, but she's done a lot of work around childless women and leaning into men too. And so my understanding from her and from the website worldchildlessweek.net, which we'll discuss in a little bit, is that someone who is child free has made more of an active, conscious decision to not have kids. Whereas someone who is childless hasn't actually made that more active or conscious decision. It's more that life sort of just got in the way, different circumstances, different situations, and I can describe some of those to lead somebody to not have kids. And some of those circumstances, we call it childless not by choice, meaning that childless by circumstance. And so some of those circumstances can be maybe someone was in an abusive relationship and they didn't want to bring a child into that kind of relationship. And we're talking about men, women, anyone who identifies as men or woman, non binary, trans, any person who doesn't have a child not by choice. So being in some type of abusive relationship can be a circumstance. Financial barriers, other barriers like mental or emotional health, lack of certain privileges or abilities, being very career driven and just being somebody who worked a lot, not having resources that would support you in having a child, whether that's a partner or other family members or a community, even not finding the right partner that you can have a child with. So there's a lot of different circumstances that lead somebody to be childless, not by choice. And essentially, in my experience, you wake up one day and you realize, oh, that clock has run out. And I never really made the choice. I didn't want to have kids. It's just life and circumstances got in the way.
So you don't have kids.
Right. I have a dog. She's my baby.
I hear you. Mine is 17, and I'm just praying every day that she keeps hanging on. um, so we seem to be in similar situations. So has this been like a struggle for you?
Yeah. Yeah. For many, many years, I think, even back into my early 40s, when I still, look, I always assumed, always kind of thought that I'd get married and have kids, right? Because that's the messaging, the society that we live in. That's what we just grow up thinking.
Right.
And so even in my early 40s and when I was in some long-term relationships that I thought were maybe going to go somewhere, I just assumed, yeah, I'll get married to this guy and we'll have kids. And as that started to not work out, and as I started realizing that, okay, I'm still not finding a partner that I would want to take that journey with, I think that's when it started really sinking in for me as I got into my later 40s, the fact that, oh, I may very well not have kids. And I was just writing today actually about how when I was, I think, 38, my mom and I were driving somewhere and she would have been, I think, 56 at the time. And I mentioned something to her about, oh, yeah, this guy I'm dating, blah, blah, blah. Well, we might get married and have kids someday. And without missing a beat, my mom said, "You're too old. You have no business having kids." And I was 38. So this would have been in 2010 that she said this. And I remember being so flabbergasted and hurt and angry by that comment from her. And I think maybe at that point, it's when it started sinking in like, well, wow, does she have a point? Do I have no business having kids? Like all
Right.
those messages, right? And then my mom eventually died a couple of years later. And then, as I said, my life just didn't work out to where I ever got married. And then once I started in my late 40s, entering perimenopause, and then now as a 51-year-old postmenopausal woman, that ship has definitely sailed. And so I think it's been in the last several years as menopause really started knocking at the door that I started really understanding, okay, yeah, this is where my life is now. I'm never going to have biological kids of my own, likely won't adopt kids either. And that took a really big toll on me, especially with my mom being gone. Like there's a lot wrapped up into this. But long story short, I really started getting very depressed and very anxious about a number of things. The first one being, well, if I don't have kids, I don't have a legacy. Like, who am I going to pass my shit on to? Both material possessions and knowledge and like all of that. Who am I going to pass anything on to?
Right.
And then that secondarily led me to think, well, okay, then what's my purpose? Why am I even here? Thinking that my whole worth and value was wrapped up in just having kids. And if I don't have kids, that must mean that I have no worth and value because I don't have any legacy.
And that's
And
what
then,
society tells us
yep,
that makes our worth and value is the fact that we have a husband and children. And if we don't, we feel left out in the cold.
yep, yep, 100%. And then the third piece of that was really something I still grapple with, and I still grapple with the legacy piece of it, but I've done some work around that. But the third piece is really just a fear of, well, when I get older, who's going to take care of me? And not to say that that's why people have kids, but that certainly is something in having conversations with friends who have kids. Like that's part of the conversation. Like they recognize whether they want to or not, that their kids are probably going to help take care of them when they get older. And I don't have that. So there's a real fear around, am I going to truly die alone with, no kids, no family around? So yeah, all of that has definitely impacted my mental health and well-being and yeah, yeah.
Can we unpack those three parts and how you've dealt with them and how you have, I guess, accepted the situation and what how you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how I am now in this moment is that it's a journey. And I think that is one of the beautiful invitations of World Childless Week and the recognition around what it means to be childless is that there's a lot of grief involved. And underlying each of those three factors I talked about is grief. And so grieving a life I thought I'd have, grieving never having a child and having that connection with a child that's like the connection I had with my mom, grieving that I might be alone, at the end of the day. So there's a lot of grief. And I think doing my own work around that grief, first of all, acknowledging that the grief was there, allowing it to be acceptable, which isn't something that we do well in this country. We don't like to acknowledge or validate grief, but validating my grief experience and then continuing to do my own work around that is how it continues to be, I think, a day by day journey for me. And some days it still gets pretty dark. Other days it's not, because one of the things that I've realized in navigating that journey and working through those three factors I mentioned is that being childless, just like everything in life, isn't just one thing and nothing else. So it's not just about the grief. It's also about the freedom that I have as somebody who doesn't have kids. It's about the fact that, we talk about Gen X a lot. Like as a Gen Xer, I get to fully embrace my freedom, my free spirit, my full authentic self. Not that people who have kids don't get to embrace that either, but I'm just saying being childless isn't just about the grief and the fear. It's also about the freedom and the joy and the full expression and all of that too. So
And
that's how we navigate.
being to take off and have a weekend in France, you can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Or more for
I
me,
mean,
like a weekend in the mountains with the
oh,
dog. Yeah. Same
okay.
thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then when it comes to legacy, then how has that really that process been?
hmm Yeah. I've been doing a lot of work around this even just recently because that seems like to be my most profound um, issue that I continue to work through because legacy is so important to me. And so it's called on me to have a different definition of legacy that isn't wrapped up in biological kids. Because first of all, I'm a wonderful auntie to other people's kids. And I really love that. Like I get to play with the kids and just get all the good stuff and
Go
have to
home.
deal with all the other stuff, right? So I can still have legacy with them. And I still have things I can teach my friends' kids. I can be that mentor, that role model, that auntie for them. So that's part of legacy, as well as just my work in the world. And so my business is what I am birthing into this world, and the impact of that business and the ripple effect that I want my business to have in terms of empowering and improving the lives of other people, particularly Gen Xers, and thinking about, well, what legacy can I leave behind with my business? Not only in the work I do with people, but monetarily, how I could then start charities or invest in things that are important to me and pay it forward and all of that. So I've started thinking about legacy through a bigger lens than just having biological kids.
I often think too that a way to leave legacy is, writing books
Yeah.
or, doing stuff like that. That's something that will last for generations to come, hopefully. But yeah, that's some things that I have thought about as well. And I'll tell you, and remind me that we haven't gotten to the third one yet
Yeah.
before I go off on a tangent. But what struck me about the video that I watched of you talking about this was, huh, I am exactly what you're talking about. I am childless, not by choice. And because it's exactly what you said, I just always assumed I was going to get married and have kids. It was just something that was, kind of a given for women in the last couple of generations. And it took me a very long time to find my partner. I did not get married until I was 40 years old. 40 years old. And at that point, I was already, well on my way into being out of range. And then I had some surgery that eliminated one of my ovaries. So that gave me even less of a chance. So I didn't really have high hopes that it would happen, but I certainly didn't try to prevent it from happening either. As I was, in my 30s, and I would talk to people about how I wasn't in a relationship because I just never wanted to do it on my own. Like my sister, she wanted to have a child more than anything. And if she had to do it by herself, she was ready to do that. I was never in that position. I wanted to be married. I wanted to have help, what have you. So it was not something that I ever thought about until I got married, which again wasn't until I was 40. I remember though complaining in my 30s to friends about how, maybe I won't have kids. And they're like, oh, you don't want to have kids at this age anyway. You're going to be 55 before they go to college and this, that, and the other thing. And I don't know. It was one of those things where I was like, it is what it is. But you made me think, is this something that I should have grieved? Is this something that I just kind of pushed off into a corner and never really acknowledged the fact that this dream never came true?
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that experience because I think it's a pretty common one and highlights another reason that people can be childless, which are infertility issues. It's a big one that I didn't mention, obviously. So, um, I never want to tell anybody that they should grieve because grief is so personal and looks very different for everybody and has a timing all of its own. And so my response to that would be to get curious first and foremost around whether is there any messaging or beliefs or stories I have that would prevent me from grieving if I felt that I needed to or wanted to. Because if there's something blocking even letting the recognition of grief kind of come into your foreground,
Mm-hmm.
then you're never going to think, well, I wish I would have grieved that, because it's just going to be cutting you off from that. So that'd be the first thing I'd get curious about is, are there any stories that I might have around grieving that would prevent me from grieving if I feel like I wanted to or need to? And then secondarily, also being curious about, I come at it from a kind of mindfulness embodied standpoint. Like, is there anything in my body that feels like it wants to grieve? Is there any twinge of sadness, regret, dashed hope, disappointment, fear, anything like that that might be stuck somewhere in my body that maybe I haven't fully acknowledged? And how can I resource myself in order to let that stuck energy sort of percolate to the surface and be able to process it?
I probably should explore it a little more. Right off the bat, it was not something that I really thought that I put much thought into. There is one thing though that does disturb me, and that is I've talked to my husband a couple of times about the fact that we hadn't had a chance to have children, and it does make me feel like a bit of a failure that I was not able to do that for him. And that part of it, I know that I kind of just push aside. And I know that he doesn't hold me responsible. I know that he's not blaming me. But at the same time, again, I think from societal standards, I just kind of feel like I failed.
Yeah, it comes back to that self-worth and value that we were talking about. And it makes so much sense. And again, I think that's very common, especially for women and for men too. Just side note, the first day of World Childless Week yesterday started off with a webinar about male childlessness. And I'll put a pin in that. We can come back to that in a second if you want to. So I just want to put that reminder out there that, especially if you're in a partnership, the partner can have their own struggles with the journey of childlessness too. So, um, and your feelings of being a failure because you couldn't, provide that to him, they're so rooted in our societal paradigms. And this is one thing the webinar yesterday was highlighting, is that from the dawn of time, human time, men have been looked at as the providers, the protectors, and women were looked at as the mothers and the nurturers. And so those roles have stuck, right? Like, that's carried forward centuries. And we still have that here in this country, where even despite as far as women have come in terms of our rights and what we're able to do, there's still those baked in notions in the systemic culture of uh, imperialist, capitalist, white bodied supremacy patriarchy that we function in every day, that says that women are the mothers and the nurturers. And if you're not fulfilling that role, you have no value to society, because that means you can't continue to perpetuate our species, essentially.
Right.
So, yeah, like that hits very deep
Yes, it
in all of
does.
us, right? And so it comes back to, again, recognizing that, getting really curious again about the stories we have about our own worth, our worth as women, um, and figuring out, okay, where again are some areas where I want to challenge some of those beliefs and stories that I've been told about what my worth looks like. Because I believe, regardless of whether somebody has children or not, we are inherently worthy. And there is nothing that we can do or not do that impacts that inherent worth. So that's where the rubber hits the road, and where we can do some really deep work around how do we get in touch with our inherent worth. But I validate you and honor you in recognizing that feeling of failure that comes up for you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's kind of inevitable, right, for us as women to feel that way. I think that maybe I haven't put a lot of thought into the fact that I am childless, not by choice, is the fact that we do have a very nice life. We live on the water at the Jersey Shore. We have a wonderful view. We have a lot of fun. We have a lot of freedom. And I know that I probably would not be in this position if we had had a child.
Yeah. And look, again, this goes back to your own personal journey, right? Like, I'm not here to say like everybody who's childless should again be grieving. That's your journey. And it comes back to, it gets to be all of that. I love the fact, as we said, that I can go take a vacation or sleep in or go to bed at whatever time I want, and not have to take care of kids during the day. Like, that's part of that freedom. And there can still be some challenges along the way, especially when it comes to challenges around what other people think about me because I don't have kids. And this is one thing just to mention. I was just making a video about this before we hopped on this call. Is especially in the workplace. One thing I noticed working as an attorney for 20 years in the federal government is that there were often subtle and overt assumptions that because I didn't have kids, I should be able to pick up some of the slack or pick up more work. And while there were plenty of times where I was happy to make that choice because I wanted to support my friends and I adored their kids, so I was more than happy to say, no, let me stay late, let me take care of that. I did not appreciate when, by the way, women managers assumed that I should stay late or I should pick up the slack. In fact, I was told one time on a case we were working, we were going to have to travel to New Jersey and potentially spend the night. And long story short, I had worked out and talked with my teammates. I was the only woman on the team because I was doing a training to be a court appointed special advocate volunteer to work with kids. I was doing that outside of work on my own free personal time. So I said, I can travel to New Jersey. I just can't spend the night. They were all fine with that. A woman manager called me into her office and said, you don't have any right not to spend the night in New Jersey because so and so has kids and so he has to stay home. You need to be the one that has to spend the night in New Jersey. And needless to say, I took her to task on that. It's like, are you telling my free time outside of work is worth less than somebody who has kids? So all that's to say, I think there are a lot of assumptions that people deal with in the workplace when they don't have kids, that they should be the ones picking up the slack.
Well, it's ironic that you bring that up. We just had a situation here with my husband. He's been working at the same place for 15 years. He has some seniority there. It's a 24-hour operation where he works, and it took him many, many years to get on the day shift. And the guy who worked the opposite hours of him was going through custody issues. And he was asked, my husband, to switch and do the night shift while this was worked out. And that ended up working out to be a year and a half. And it was miserable. I was furious. I mean, it was so unfair. But as my husband put it, oh, if I say no, I'm the jerk. So we are pushed into these situations.
Yeah. And look, I don't know what the answer is, right? Like, I don't know what the answer is to those kinds of situations. I think my hope and my invitation is for people to recognize when they are making assumptions about people who don't have kids and to check those assumptions and to actually have a conversation with the people who don't have kids and the people who have kids to see what a workable result could be instead of just assuming that the childless person can pick up the slack.
So let's go back to that third thing that you were discussing about the fear of not having somebody to take care of us as we grow older.
Yeah. Yeah. That's also one that comes up for me a lot as somebody I think who's very obsessed about my legacy. And so I often think about, okay, well, I'm going to end up in a nursing home all by myself with no family, drooling all over. And yeah, so that gets pretty heavy at times. And look, at the end of the day, I have friends whose children have died. I have friends who don't have a great relationship with their children, friends who don't expect their children to take care of them when they're older. So all of that's to say that I'm trying to recognize my own stories about what it means for me down the road as I get older to not have kids, and comparing myself to what I think other people who have kids might have that I won't have when I get down the road. So I've got to start to recognize those own stories for myself and recognize at the end of the day, nobody has any guarantee or certainty about what their future looks like, who's going to be taking care of them or not taking care of them, or who's, if and when we're going to die alone, right? Like we don't know how that's going to play out. So when I kind of check myself and get real about that uncertainty, that helps. And I also want to listen to what that voice of fear really is the voice of not trusting, also not believing that, again, I'm enough, that I'm going to have a community of people who would be with me at the end of my line. And it also invites me to be creative about what my life could look like. I think I mentioned I have some girlfriends that we've talked about. We might just have to form our own little commune, like a lot of other cultures do, where we just, buy some houses or buy one big house, like Grace and Frankie style, and take care of each other, and that would be amazing. So, yeah, that fear of like dying alone and having nobody to take care of me comes up a lot. And it's just an opportunity for me to get really curious about, well, what's the real fear underneath that?
Mm. And that sounds very adult the way that you explained that. But it's true though. Like even if you do have kids, it doesn't mean that they are going to take care of you in your old age.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
you could go through all of that and still not have it turn out the way that you want. So tell me more about the World Childless Week.
Yeah. As I mentioned, this was started by a woman named Jody Day, and it's now being continued by another woman named Stephanie. And the website is worldchildlessweek.net. And so it's September 11th, so started yesterday through the 17th. And every day they have different themes or topics. Yesterday it was our stories. Today it's about childless step parents. So recognizing people who don't have their own biological children and who are then also coming into a relationship where somebody else has children. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic for them to hold.
Right.
Um, and then, the rest of the week has a lot of different themes. The one I'm really looking forward to, I think, is the one toward the end of the week on September 16th. That's about We Are Worthy. So coming back to that theme of worthiness that we talked about.
Right.
And the beautiful thing that the folks who are putting this week on have done is that they've invited childless people all around the world. This is a UK based event, but it's all around the world. They've invited folks to submit articles, poems. They have a whole page of resources of everyone from coaches to therapists, counselors who can support childless people. So there's a whole host of resources, groups, communities. It's a really fantastic place to go to try and find some community, because I think that's so important in any kind of healing work that we're doing, but especially for people who are childless, to find community. And so I think that's one of the things this whole week is doing is helping people find that community, as well as raise awareness around what it means to be childless, the faces of people who are childless, um, the grieving that, like we talked about, that's a big focus of a lot of the work in this week. And so it's something I've kind of thrown myself into. I submitted an article. It'll be published along with the other resources on the 16th too. And my article was about some of the things we've talked about. I think I entitled it, Am I Just an Accident with No Legacy? Because I was an accidental birth and all these questions about legacy. So I've really thrown myself into this week. And just in the last even 24 hours, it's been really healing. Just listening to the webinars and getting more knowledge, more language to put around this experience. One of the words that I learned recently that I hadn't known was the word pronatal. And so recognizing that we grow up in a culture, again, since the dawn of time, that's very pronatal, like child forward, pronatalism. And so anyone who doesn't have a kid, they're sort of oppressed by that system of pronatalism. So it's just great to have more information and be able to put some language to some of the things that I've been experiencing.
And what is the website again?
It's worldchildlessweek.net.
Okay.
And they're all over social media, mostly Instagram. I think they might have some YouTube videos, and all of the videos that they have recorded for the webinars are available to watch on replay, including past years that they've done this. So a lot of resources on their website. And I should just say, I have nothing to do with this. I'm not a presenter. I'm just a participant and a really huge fan of the work that they're doing.
And part of your legacy now is you are the founder of Life from the Summit. So tell me all about that.
Yeah, thanks. It's my business that I started 4 years ago now, while I was still working as an attorney, and then ultimately quit my attorney job so I could focus on the business full time. And I focus on working with Gen Xers because I realize that as Gen Xers, we are now in our 40s and 50s. We are like the age group that is smack dab in quote midlife, whether that's an appropriate term or not. And so we start to have a lot of questions coming up, including legacy, purpose,
Right.
all those kinds of things. So I specialize in working with Gen Xers, and I'm a certified coach and a certified mindfulness meditation teacher. And so I kind of merge those practices and strategies and teachings together to support people on their journey. And I also do mindfulness trainings for companies and keynote speeches on conscious leadership. So yeah, a lot happening with the business that I hope to build up and have be part of my legacy.
So who is it that you think that you can help the most? What kind of client is it that you are, focused on?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, my clients have tended to be professional. I work with a lot of lawyers, understandably, since I was a lawyer. So more professional white collar jobs who are in that. I've had some younger clients, but a lot of them have been sort of in that 40-ish range and their early 50s. So people usually come to me with one of two things. Either it's something like, I want to learn how to train for this race, or, run a marathon or do an Ironman or whatever, have some goal. Or they come to me with these major questions of like, I want to find my purpose. I don't know if I should stay in this career. What should be my next chapter, that kind of thing. And what's interesting about that span of issues is that at the end of the day, we all actually kind of talk about the same stuff. Like, because if you want to train for a marathon, you're going to have to get really good on your stories, your fears, all the stuff that's buried deep beneath you that's kept you from meeting those goals before. And if you want to find your purpose in the next chapter, we're going to have to dig deep into that quote stuff too. So it's just, yeah, I think that answers your question. It tends to be like the 40, 50-year-old professionals who are coming to me for a variety of reasons.
So it's just a lot of personal growth. We all need a lot of personal growth, right?
Yeah. Healing is as my coach, Maisha T. Hill, talks about, just healing. We're all on this healing liberation journey.
Okay. Now, how do we
Yeah.
get in touch with you to find out more about Life from the Summit?
Thanks. The website is lifefromthesummit.com. I'm on Instagram and TikTok now, begrudgingly a little bit, and Facebook at Life from the Summit. And you can find me on Medium under my name, Michelle L. Walter. I publish a lot of articles on Medium, and I have a YouTube channel, I think is Life from the Summit also.
Okay. And I will put your website and the World Childless Week website on in the show notes so that everybody
Yep.
can have a quick access to them. So, Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so eye-opening, and I really feel like I've learned a lot. And, I feel a little bit more seen. So that is what I truly appreciate.
That's huge. That's my hope for everybody who's moving through this childless journey. So thank you for having me, Wendy, and for the conversation, and just for all the work that you're doing and the goodness that you're putting out into the world too. So keep it up.
Well, thank you so much. And we will talk soon. I'm pretty
Yep.
sure we're going to talk soon.
Yep.
Okay, thanks again. Thank you for joining me in this conversation. Together, we are better. Please visit my website at hopefulist.com and remember to hit that subscribe or follow button.